So the White House has halted delivery of £2,000 bombs to Israel. This is in response to the military invasion of the city of Rafah, which is in the south of Gaza. It's currently sheltering about 1 million Palestinians. Just for a bit of context, I believe Rafah is smaller than, for example, Disney World, Florida. And there are tons of examples you can find out there. People have been online making these sorts of size comparisons to show you how small Rafah really is for somewhere to be holding 1 million people. I believe, look at Liverpool. Liverpool has about 400,000, I believe, people in it. And it is several times larger than than Rafah. This is a very densely packed, overrun place that cannot sustain these people. It's jam-packed, there's 1 million people there, and it seems like they are fully committed. The Israeli government is fully committed to going in there and rooting out Hamas, even though there is no military capability of Hamas now. There's no potential to strike inside Israel. There is no existential threat to Israel, really no lethal threat to Israel. In this late stage of the war, very few civilians have died. Obviously, all civilian deaths are tragic, and also very few Israeli service members have died compared to the number of Palestinians that have. It is just not proportional. It is completely out of whack. It's ridiculous. So rooting out Hamas, from what we've seen from the Israeli government so far, would basically mean massacring quite a lot of Palestinians, almost definitely more than the 35, possibly more, going on 40, 50,000 Palestinians that we've seen dead so far. That would probably be dwarfed basically by a full ground infantry included military operation into Rafah. And this is a significant moment because this is the first time in this stage of the Palestinian genocide since October 7th, those Hamas attacks. This is the first time since then that US support has wavered or conditioned or paused or hesitated even a little bit. Everything up until now has been complete support, no strings attached to anything, no conditions attached to any support, no, criticism, definitely no criticism. The only thing they have said is, do not go into Rafah, we disagree with that. I'm sorry, they haven't even said do not go into Rafah, they said, we've made it clear that we disagree with this. They will make their policy, said, we're not going to try and pressure them, we're not there to pressure them into making their own policy decisions. They'll make their own policy decisions, and we'll make ours. So not even actually directly criticising or saying don't go into Rafah, but just very, very tepidly being like, ooh, we don't agree with this. And now, when it has happened, because Netanyahu has basically said from the start, nah, fuck you, we're just going to do it. He's said it just out and out, we are going to invade Rafah for weeks now. The Israeli war cabinet voted unanimously on invading it. There was a press conference in the US where they were coping still and pretending that it hadn't happened, it hadn't started, because they were like, oh, they've gone into this part of Rafah, we'll see if they actually go through the operation. It's like, no, that is the operation. It's just the start of the operation. They just need to go there first. The cabinet voted on it. They unanimously said, we're going to invade Rafah. They are invading it right now, actually. And obviously, there's not much I can say about the consequences of the literal invasion on the ground, because we all know that is just terrible. Nothing I can say, really. But something that I would like to explore is whether I think there is any potential for this final, eventual conditioning and, hesitancy to support Israel militarily is representative of anything, symbolic of anything, or is this just a fluke? I believe that it is. I believe that this does represent and is caused by a longer term change in how much the US is willing to align itself with Israel. And the reason I believe that is because this isn't just about Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu is quite desperate because domestically, if you look at his approval ratings, he has very low approval ratings in Israel, even compared to a lot of countries. So obviously, most leaders have approval ratings less than 50%. Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe, is regularly below 30%, below 20% even, especially in the early phases of the war. And basically, if Israel went to an election right now, he probably wouldn't be able to cling on to power. He has been engaged in very complex sort of parliamentary election games, trying to cut deals, trying to make coalitions with all the different fractured parties in Israel, because the Israeli government, at least in terms of its actual legislature, is pretty chaotic. There's always little rival factions. It's always hard to unite people. It's always hard to get a leader. In, I think, 2022, they had a bit of a crisis. They just kept having elections where no one really had enough of a firm hold over their I don't even know if it's actually called a parliament. Oh, the word came into my mind but then fluttered off. But yeah, their legislature, it's hard for them to gain control over it. It's pretty chaotic. And Netanyahu, just by manoeuvring and pitting factions against other factions and using these tricks and distractions and obviously emergency powers, which he's been allowed to sort of delay things and cling on to power a bit longer because of this war in Gaza. But it's not just about Gaza. The thing is, in order to keep the nationalists in Israel, and there are a lot of nationalists in Israel, in order to keep them happy, in order to maintain, I guess, excuses to delay elections, in order to maintain a sense of fear and paranoia, to get people to rally around the flag and to just get behind them, get behind the government, get behind the state in a time of crisis, which is what happens in times of crisis. A lot of the time you can get this rally around the flag effect. And if you've got a war going on, and you convince people that everyone is out to kill you, they're all going to kill you if we don't just do a genocide, then you can scare and get a lot of people desperate enough to just keep voting for you anyway, or at least not try actively to get you out. But still, it's not really working. It doesn't seem like he would win an election right now. So basically, Benjamin Netanyahu, if he wants to stay in power and do what he wants, he has to keep thinking of reasons and excuses to have some sort of crisis going on. And I think that after Gaza, it'll be the West Bank. And I'm not talking, in 10 years' time, like, I don't just mean like, it's setting a bad precedent. I mean that once this gets wrapped up, and it seems like, I do believe that the entirety of Gaza will be under the control of the Israeli military within the next few months. That seems like almost certain to me, like 95%. So we're talking, I believe, in the next year, maybe like 50% in the next year, you will see an Israeli, like a proper Israeli offensive into the West Bank again. I believe this will be after the US election, 2024. It depends how quickly relations deteriorate. I don't think it will happen that quickly. I think relations will be good enough so that right near the 2024 US elections, which are going to be so close Biden because of all the backlash he's getting domestically because of supporting this genocide, I think they will do a lot and offer a lot to Netanyahu to not do another crazy fucking genocidal war act right when the election's happening. I feel like I should probably look up when the next Israeli election is due, but it changes a lot. I'll put it in the description. But I think at the latest, he can maybe push it to early 2025. They might have been due late this year, but I think, again, he's trying to use powers and crises to push it back. So at the latest, early 2025. So election results would be clear. People would have gone to the polls mostly in early November 2024. So basically late 2024, early 2025 is the sort of prime time once, the Israeli military has recovered and recuperated from that genocide, that he could go into the West Bank. It's another crisis. He can keep getting land, keep getting as much power. And it's not just about trying to stay in power. It's about doing stuff while you're there. It's a weird thing with psychopathic sort of dictators. If they're about to be deposed or they're about to lose power, a lot of them will just try and rush stuff out quickly before they leave, just so they can make them off, just so they can get what they wanted, their fantasy, just for a little time. I mean, hopefully as well, because Gaza isn't really at all a very big place, as a lot of people know. The West Bank is a bit bigger, and I think maybe he's also thinking that from a practical economic perspective, slightly. I mean, he's not very practically minded. He's a bit crazy. Well, not a bit. He's fucking lunatic. But maybe he feels that with the entirety of Palestine under Israeli control and the benefits that would open up in terms of the amount of land, more access to the sea, because Gaza has a western coast, so extra sea access, better access with Jordan, because West Bank neighbours with Jordan, better access to Egypt, because Gaza neighbours of Egypt, that could open up a lot of windows. And I think that possibly because also, Israel, by the way, hasn't been doing very well recently, economically anyway. They've had declining birth rate. Their GDP hasn't been doing too well. It's not very good over there in Israel right now. So maybe if he can up the economic conditions for the average Israeli in the short term by just pillaging, because you couldn't do it like quickly with actual like economic benefits. Like if you've got loads of new land in a year or two, the economic benefits you get from that aren't going to noticeably affect the average person. But if you now control this land and whatever's there, and you can just pillage it, and in the short term for a few months or for a year or 2 years, the average Israeli is better off. That could be enough to convince enough of them to vote for you, just to cling on to power. Maybe he doesn't get a majority, maybe he gets 40% of the vote, maybe he gets 30% of the vote, but maybe that's enough with these coalitions and with no one else in the Israeli parliament being able to form enough of a coalition to beat that. He can keep going. I believe this because obviously the West Bank is the other sort of site of this genocide that has almost always, throughout the 70 years, been active in some way. There's always been militias, like civilian militias that are loosely related to the Israeli government, but they're not technically combatants, so it's less controversial. There's always been militants there causing crimes, corruption about, police have murdered civilians and they get away with it, stuff like that, or out and out, obviously, just invasion. So I find that pretty obvious, and also the fact that there have been some infantry incursions with actual boots on the ground into the West Bank since October 7th, because they're starting to ramp it up now. There's been an increased number of missile strikes in the West Bank, so already it seems like they've been planning for the next step. Also, there have been a significantly increased number of strikes in Lebanon. Lebanon is a country more to the northwest. It's sort of up from Gaza. And there have been several hundred missiles or shells fired into Lebanon and back at Israel, but not as many by a long shot since October 7th. Rhetoric by the Israeli government has increased around Lebanon, talking about them more actively as an enemy and talking about needing to act on them. So it feels like, for me, because of those reasons, the Israeli government and Netanyahu in particular are just becoming so much more of a destabilizing force than possibly the US are willing to keep around and keep supporting. Because again, it was fine when it was this slow genocide that was creeping, happening very bureaucratically, very westerly, where every 5 years they take like 2 miles, then the UN, they go to court, and then they say, oh yeah, and then they rip up the last treaty and then move another 2 miles. That suited America. It wasn't too chaotic, it wasn't too destabilizing, it wasn't too disruptive of the status quo. But now Netanyahu is getting so desperate and he wants to speed everything up, accelerate everything, where you could have this exact situation again straight after the elections with the West Bank, and then there's another war in the West Bank, more destabilization, more global destabilization. And then if you've got Lebanon as well, and Lebanon is a completely different story. It's not like the West Bank, it's not like Gaza. Lebanon is actually a militarily significant force. Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization that mostly controls the Lebanese government, because I should probably say that Lebanon does have an official government, but Hezbollah do in practice mostly control it. Hezbollah are a powerful military force. They have, I believe, over 100,000 combat like soldiers. So they do have a significant army. They also have lots and lots of like old-fashioned, low-quality, quite small like shells and a variety of explosive weapons like mortars and small missiles and stuff like that. Mostly given by like Russia and Iran, because it's just mostly surplus from the old Soviet days or old Iranian surplus, and it's just really quantity over quality really. And because they haven't really actively had to fight Israel for quite a while, because obviously Israel has invaded Lebanon before, so there's that old tension from like the 90s, but since then, for about 10 years, there hasn't been really proper active fighting between Israel and Lebanon. And in that time, that tension has just increased, especially with Iran. And Iran's a big country, so they've been arming up this relatively small force, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and giving them all their old shit. And they've just amassed this big stockpile of like 300,000 bombs. So this wouldn't be like such a cakewalk as this has been for the Israeli government. This would be a proper, like, kind of sort of matched war, like a similarly matched war, where you would have like so much destruction. It would just be horrible. And they would go on for years. And it just wouldn't stop. Benjamin Netanyahu was a fucking psycho, and he just would not stop. So, I do believe that this is a bit of a turning point. And just one of the reasons why this matters, I'm sure you can think of a lot of abstract reasons why sort of global stability and threatening that is just pretty bad. But a specific instance of this that happened, I believe it was last month, I think it happened in April, was when, you might have heard about this, an Israeli missile hit an Iranian consulate and killed Iranian diplomats. And obviously that is just an absolute violation of any sort of international order. Consulates and embassies are just basically like sacred ground in international diplomacy. It is considered a big taboo, a big no-no, one of the biggest, to attack an embassy. And they just bombed an embassy and killed several officers and pretty high-level diplomats of Iran. And that is undisputably an act of war. And with the possibility that Iran might have nuclear weapons, they just did a military action against a possible nuclear power and probably the most powerful nation in the Middle East. And Iran, thank your lucky stars that Iran was the sensible party in this situation and did this like symbolic little like fake like hollow strike against some like equipment posts and stuff. I can't remember what it was specifically. I'll put it in the description. But I don't think anyone died. I don't think a single person died. They warned them several days in advance and told them it was coming and told them what the general makeup of the strike would be, and just made sure that they got a few hits through so they could just technically say that they hit Israel and that they hit proxies that were aligned with Israel in the Middle East, but no one actually got hurt and it wouldn't actually escalate anything. They purposely told them about it in advance and basically kind of told them how to intercept it so that the Iranian government could save face and say, okay, we've done something, we don't want to drag this into a big war. So I guess the US should just be crossing themselves and just thanking God that Iran was actually more sensible and more calm than Israel in that situation. What a strange thing to be relying on. Relying on Iran to keep together world peace and not make this escalate into a big world war. That's what it's come to, relying on Iran for that. The whole point is that Israel is supposed to be like, oh, this cool Western democracy stabilizing force in the Middle East. And all they've been doing for I guess in a more behind the scenes slow way for 70 years, but in a much more intense way, at least the past 7 months, all they've been doing recently is causing more chaos and causing less stability and less, cooperation. And that is just the first sort of big example that has materialized of this principle that is becoming clear, of Israel just lashing out more and more because of the desperation of Netanyahu. They'll have US analysts who have seen this pattern coming long off. That incident with Iran will have rattled the US. The incident with Rafah will have pissed off the US. And I just think if this is their reaction to this, the invasion of Rafah, a city of 1 million, what are they going to do if in about a month's time, Netanyahu says, okay, we're going to invade the West Bank now, the West Bank is Israel, it's ours. And then they have to plead with him, and Biden, because he's a spineless cock, feels like he has to plead with him and give him stuff, this little tiny 9 million people nation, and has to give him concessions for him to not do that just before his election run against fucking felon who might run from jail, and in some crazy world there's a tiny remote chance that he could still win from jail Donald Trump. That's what he has to do. He's embarrassed him so much, disrespected him, made him stoop to this level. Yeah, he's obviously a cook, but I feel like Biden will have his limit. And if that's not his limit, what about after that in 2025? Maybe he can stall for a few months in 2025 and get some gains off that, pillage some West Bank homes. But then what about later in 2025? Or maybe in 2026 when he says, okay, Lebanon's attacked us, it make up some fake thing, or not even just make it up, just say, that's our land, we want a greater Israel, and just attack Lebanon. It's not sustainable. Benjamin Netanyahu's reign is not sustainable, which means that his actions are not sustainable, which then means that the US-Israel super positive, super cooked relationship is not sustainable. So I think that in the next few years, you're going to see serious deteriorations in that relationship. And I think this is a part of the US's broader shift of focus away from the Middle East. They got a lot of what they wanted out of the Middle East. A lot of it was a failure. So what did go well doesn't apply anymore. And what they've tried to do in a lot of cases, like with Afghanistan and with Iraq, didn't work. So they gave up. They've started the process of giving up finally after like 20 years. They got out of Afghanistan in an official sense completely. Obviously, there's always a few troops somewhere, but they removed all significant numbers of troops from Afghanistan in 2021. They're planning to do that from Iraq as well, but this has sort of put the delay on that. It's also in their rhetoric. The US State Department and Joe Biden himself has talked about pivoting more towards the Asia Pacific, like looking more towards China, more than Iran. So especially in a time period where the US is looking more to sort of dust its hands off from the Middle East and say, let's forget about that, let's try and find somewhere new. This, I feel, will greatly accelerate that process and greatly cement that process and cement the decision making in the White House to say, yes, we're definitely going to do this. Fuck the Middle East. We fucked it up too much. It's a mess. Let's shift our main focuses somewhere else where there's more sort of pressing issues, more new and emerging issues, and where we can sort of make the most gains with their strong allies in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan, so forth, all strong US allies, which are being sort of threatened by China right now, whether it's China threatening Taiwan directly or continuously crossing into, what's it called, water space, not water space, I'm thinking of airspace, but it's like your waters, your national waters of the Philippines, and also Laos going in. I think Laos has a coast going into national waters in the Asia Pacific, and sort of trying to puff its chest out and say, you know, we're basically going to invade here in a few years. Get used to it. When they've got that on the plate, why have they got to be fucking around with Israel trying to genocide someone every year? So those are my thoughts on why I think that relationship will deteriorate in the next few years. I don't think that the US does just literally have limitless patience for Israel. It can feel like that sometimes, and about a month ago, I maybe would have said so, but these things that have happened over the past month or two, these new developments about Rafah, about Iran, the slow changing of the rhetoric, and the US officials being slightly less cooked than usual, does show a change. And it seems like there is potential for the US and Israel to have a real falling out. Probably not this month. No, well, not probably. Never underestimate how cooked the US can be to Israel, especially the Biden administration. So not this month, but maybe in the next few months there will be a big falling out. If not, I think probably in the next few years.